The rain had been falling since early morning, the kind of slow, steady drizzle that makes November feel longer than it actually is. I stood at the front window of my daughter's house, watching the droplets slide down the glass, each one finding its own path before disappearing at the bottom of the pane. Behind me, the guest room still smelled faintly of fresh paint. My daughter had repainted it just before I arrived. Beige. She called it warm sand. I thought it looked like the walls of a hospital corridor, but I kept that to myself. I was 68 years old, a retired nurse, and 3 months earlier I had sold the house where I had raised 2 children, buried a husband, and spent 31 years of my life. The house on Clover Hill Road in Ashland, Ohio, where my daughter learned to ride a bicycle on the driveway, where my son carved his initials into the back porch railing when he was 9, where my husband took his last breath in the bedroom we had shared since 1987. I sold it for $260,000. After closing costs and a few outstanding bills, I walked away with $242,000, most of it sitting in a savings account I had opened the week after the sale closed. My daughter had called me 3 weeks after the funeral for the house. That was how I thought of it. The funeral, the day I handed over the keys. She called and said, "Mom, you shouldn't be alone in that apartment. Come live with us." Her voice had been warm, genuine, I thought. My son-in-law got on the line and said there was plenty of room, that the guest suite had its own bathroom, that I could come and go as I pleased. He said it like he meant it. I believed him because I wanted to. I packed what mattered. The rest went to my sister in Columbus and a donation center on Route 30. I drove the 4.5 hours to their house in Glendale, a suburb outside of Cincinnati that I had always found a little too polished, too symmetrical, as if someone had designed it from a catalog. The houses all had the same deep green lawns and matching mailboxes. My daughter's house was the largest on the street, 4 bedrooms, a 3-car garage, a kitchen that had been renovated twice in 8 years. They had done well for themselves. Or rather, my son-in-law's family had done well, and my daughter had married into it. The first 2 weeks were easy in the way that first weeks always are. Everyone performs their best version of themselves. My daughter made Sunday brunch. My son-in-law asked about my years as a nurse and seemed genuinely interested. Their 13-year-old daughter, my granddaughter, showed me how to use a streaming app on the television and sat with me while we watched an old movie she had never heard of. I felt useful. I felt welcome. I felt, for the first time since my husband died, like I was part of something, rather than a leftover piece of something that no longer existed. Then the questions started. Small at first, casual, the way truly significant things are often introduced. My son-in-law mentioned over dinner one evening that he had a friend at a financial planning firm, someone who specialized in helping retirees manage their assets. He said it lightly, between bites of chicken, like it was something he had just thought of. I said I had a financial advisor, a woman I had worked with for 11 years, and that I was happy with her. He nodded and said, of course, just throwing it out there. A few days later, my daughter brought it up again, differently framed. She said she worried about me. She said the money from the house was sitting in a simple savings account, earning almost nothing. She said with my age, she actually said with your age, as if age were a condition, a diagnosis I should be thinking about protecting what I had. I told her I was thinking about it. I told her I had a plan. She smiled the smile she used to give me when she was 16 and thought she knew better. The third time it came up, my son-in-law sat across from me at the kitchen table with a manila folder. Inside were printed pages from what appeared to be a financial planning website, with certain paragraphs highlighted in yellow. He explained, patiently, as though I had never worked a day in my life or managed a household budget for 3 decades, that a durable power of attorney for finances would allow a designated person to manage my accounts if I were ever incapacitated or, as he put it, simply too overwhelmed to handle things. He slid a page toward me. I looked at it. I did not pick it up. I said I would think about it. That night I could not sleep. I lay in the warm sand room and stared at the ceiling and told myself I was overreacting. These were people who loved me. My daughter had painted this room for me. My son-in-law had carried my boxes in from the car without being asked. I was a 68-year-old woman who had spent the better part of a year grieving, and grief, I knew from experience, could make everything feel more threatening than it was. I closed my eyes and listened to the house settle around me, and eventually, I fell asleep. What happened the following Thursday changed everything. I want to be careful here, because I am not a person who exaggerates. In 40 years as a nurse, I learned to observe precisely, to report what I saw and heard without editorializing. So, when I tell you what I heard that evening, I want you to understand that I am telling you exactly what was said, with no additions, no interpretations, just the words themselves. It was a Thursday evening. My daughter had taken my granddaughter to a school event, a choir rehearsal, or something similar. I was in the guest room reading, which was what I usually did in the evenings. I heard my son-in-law on the phone in the hallway, just outside my door. He did not know I was in. I had come back earlier than expected from a walk because the rain started again. His voice was low but not low enough. The walls in that house, despite all the expensive finishes, were not particularly thick. He said, "She's not going to like it, but she doesn't have to like it. We get the POA, and everything goes through me. That's the cleanest way." There was a pause. He said, "No, she trusts her. That's the problem. We have to work around that advisor. Once we have the POA, we can move the accounts." Another pause. Longer. He said, "Carol's not going to push back once I explain it to her. She never does when it comes to her mother." Carol is my daughter's name. I sat very still on the edge of the bed with my book open on my lap, and the words on the page meaning nothing at all. I heard him laugh quietly at something the other person said. I heard him walk away down the hall. I heard the door to his office close. I sat there for a long time. The book was still open. Outside, the rain continued its steady, indifferent work against the window. Somewhere downstairs, a clock ticked. I thought about the way he had slid that paper across the table to me. I thought about my daughter's smile, the one I had mistaken for condescension, wondering now if it was something else, something that hurt more than condescension. I thought about the word cleanest, the cleanest way. I did not cry. I have never been a crier, not since my early 30s, when I learned that crying in professional settings was used against you, and the habit carried over into the rest of life. Instead, I thought clearly and carefully, the way I used to think at 3 in the morning in a hospital ward, when something was going wrong with a patient and there was no attending physician within immediate reach, and the decision was mine alone to make. I thought, I am not going to let this happen. I did not confront him. I did not confront my daughter. I want to explain why, because I know some people would find that difficult to understand. I had no recording of what I heard. I had no proof beyond the words in my own memory, and I had lived long enough to know that when you confront someone without proof, the confrontation itself becomes the story. I would have become the problem. The suspicious, paranoid elderly mother who was imagining things, hearing things, reading too much into a private phone call. I had seen this dynamic before, more times than I could count, in the families of patients I cared for. The older person raises the alarm, and the family closes ranks, and suddenly the one who spoke up is the one who needs to be managed. No, I was not going to play that game. The next morning, I called my financial advisor from my car, parked 2 blocks from the house. I told her what I had heard. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Margaret, I'm glad you called me." She told me to do nothing that looked unusual, to sign nothing, to agree to nothing. She said she would make some calls. I drove to the public library that afternoon. I told my daughter I was going to browse, and I used one of the computer terminals to research something I had been thinking about since the night before. I am a careful person by nature, and careful people make plans before they act. Over the next 11 days, I conducted my life normally. I helped my granddaughter with a history project. I made a pot of chicken soup on a Sunday, and my son-in-law told me it was the best he had ever eaten. I smiled and said thank you, and I meant neither the smile nor the thank you, but I delivered both convincingly, because 40 years of nursing will teach you, if nothing else, how to maintain a professional demeanor under conditions of significant internal stress. I had 3 phone calls during those 11 days that I took outside, in my car, at varying times so as not to establish a pattern. The first was with my financial advisor. The second was with an attorney, a woman named Patricia, who had been recommended by my advisor, who specialized in estate planning and elder law. The third was with the director of a senior living community called Hearthstone Gardens in Worthington, about 2 hours from Glendale, which I had found during my afternoon at the library. Not a nursing home, a community, apartments with full kitchens, a garden program, a book club, a woodworking shop, a schedule of day trips, and a waiting list that, I was told, had recently gotten shorter. Patricia, the attorney, was direct in the way that good attorneys are. She explained my options. She explained what a durable power of attorney actually entailed, and what it would and would not permit. She explained what I could do before any such document was ever signed to protect what was mine. She was not alarmed by my situation. She had heard worse. That, in its own way, was both comforting and deeply sad. I gave her my instructions. On a Tuesday, 11 days after the evening in the guest room, I called Hearthstone Gardens again and confirmed that a one-bedroom apartment would become available in 3 weeks. I said I would take it. I gave them a deposit, paid by phone with my debit card, while sitting in the parking lot of a grocery store. I spent the following week quietly sorting through my belongings. I did not pack. Not yet. I simply knew what I would take and what I would leave. The framed photos of my husband and our life together, the quilt my mother made, a set of kitchen knives I had owned for 20 years, my nursing certificates, which I still kept in a folder not because I needed them, but because they represented something I had earned entirely by myself. I wrote 2 letters, one to my daughter, one to my son-in-law. I did not mail them. I left them. The morning I left, my daughter and son-in-law were at a school event for my granddaughter, a morning assembly. I had told them the night before that I was not feeling well enough to go. My daughter had pressed the back of her hand to my forehead and said I felt fine. I said I was probably just tired. She looked at me for a moment longer than usual. But then my son-in-law called her from the hallway, and the moment passed. I carried my bags to my car in 4 trips. It was a cold morning, the kind that feels blue. The sky pale and thin above the identical green lawns of that neighborhood. I stood beside my car after the last trip and looked at the house for a moment, the window of the guest room, the deep green lawn, the catalog mailbox. I thought about the 31 years on Clover Hill Road. I thought about my husband in his last months, how he used to sit on the back porch in the early evenings, regardless of the temperature, just to be outside, and how I used to bring him a cup of coffee he rarely finished, and sit beside him, and not say much of anything, because there was nothing left that needed to be said between us. I thought about how much I missed him, how different things might have been if he were still here. Then I got in my car and drove. I was on the interstate for about 40 minutes before I felt my hand stop gripping the steering wheel quite so tightly. An hour in, I stopped at a rest area and bought a cup of coffee from a vending machine, which was terrible, and drank it standing outside in the cold, watching trucks pass on the highway. A woman walking a small dog nodded at me. I nodded back. The sky had cleared somewhat, and there was actual sunlight on the pavement. I called my son on the drive. He lived in Portland, and we had always had an easier relationship, my son and I. Perhaps because he had moved far enough away that we did not have to manage the complicated daily business of proximity. He answered on the second ring. When I told him what had happened, everything from the beginning, he was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, he said, "Mom, I'm so sorry. Not defensive, not disbelieving, just sorry." I told him I was all right, that I had handled it, that I was on my way somewhere good. He asked me to call him when I arrived. I said I would. My daughter called at 11:47 that morning. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 12:15. Then my son-in-law called once from a number I recognized, and I let that go as well. My daughter called a third time at 1:30. I pulled off the highway at an exit with a diner, parked, and listened to the voicemails. The first message was confused. She had come home, found my room cleared, found the letter on the kitchen counter. Her voice had the specific quality of someone trying very hard to sound calm when they are not calm at all. She said she didn't understand. She said please call her. The second message was longer. She had read the letter. She said she didn't know about any phone call, that she hadn't been part of any plan, that I needed to come back so we could talk. Her voice broke once, near the end. I sat with that for a moment. I sat with the sound of my daughter crying in a voicemail, and I thought about all the years behind us, all the ordinary mornings and ordinary arguments, and ordinary love that fills up a life between a mother and her child, and I thought it was possible she was telling the truth. It was possible she genuinely had not known the full extent of what her husband had been arranging. I thought it was possible, but I also thought, even if that were true, I had listened to her husband explain, patiently and repeatedly, over 3 weeks, why I should sign over control of my finances, and she had been in the room for those conversations. She had smiled that smile. She had echoed his concerns about my savings account, about my age, and she had never once said, "Mom, this is your money and your decision, and we support whatever you choose." Not once. I put the phone in my bag and went into the diner and ordered soup and a grilled cheese sandwich and ate at a corner table by the window, watching a family at the next table try to manage 2 toddlers and a basket of French fries, and I thought that looked very hard and also very full of something good that I recognized and missed. I arrived at Hearthstone Gardens at 3 in the afternoon. It was nothing like the nursing home I had feared, the one I had seen in my daughter's eyes on certain evenings when she looked at me and thought I wasn't noticing. The buildings were low and spread across several acres, connected by covered walkways bordered with winter plantings, dormant now but clearly tended. The lobby had large windows and actual plants, not artificial ones, and 2 women about my age were seated at a table near the entrance, working on what appeared to be a jigsaw puzzle of considerable ambition. The director, a man in his 40s with an unhurried manner, showed me to the apartment. 1 bedroom, a full kitchen with a window above the sink that looked out onto a courtyard with a stone path and a dormant rose garden. He said the roses would come back in May. He said they were a variety called Climbing New Dawn, pale pink, very fragrant. My mother had grown roses. I stood at the window and looked at the bare canes against the stone, and I thought about May, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt curious about the future rather than afraid of it. I signed my lease that afternoon. In the weeks that followed, my daughter and I spoke twice by phone. Both conversations were difficult. She was hurt. I was careful. I told her I loved her, because I did. And I told her that what I had heard in that hallway was real. And I told her I was not interested in being managed, at any age, by anyone, regardless of their intentions. She said her husband had been trying to help. I said I believed she believed that. I did not say what else I believed. My son-in-law sent 1 email. It was long and formal, and used phrases like, "your best interests," and clearly a misunderstanding and concern for your well-being, in a way that, having now worked with Patricia the attorney, I recognized as the language people use when they are more concerned with legal exposure than with the actual person in front of them. I forwarded it to Patricia. She said to keep it. I did. Patricia had, in those 11 days before I left, helped me do several things that I want to describe because I think they matter. The savings account from the house sale had been moved to a new bank, one that neither my daughter nor my son-in-law had any knowledge of or relationship with. A revocable living trust had been established in my name, with my son in Portland named as the successor trustee, contingent on a physician's determination of incapacity, not a family member's decision, not a relative's preference, a physician's determination. My financial advisor remained my financial advisor, with instructions on file that no changes to the account were to be made based on third-party requests without my direct written authorization. These were not dramatic actions. They were simply the ordinary, sensible things that a competent person does to protect what belongs to her. I also updated my advance healthcare. My son in Portland was named my healthcare proxy. I mailed him a copy. He called me when he received it and said, "Mom, I'll do right by you." I told him I knew that. By December, I had settled into a life that surprised me with how full it was. I joined the book club, which met on Wednesday evenings and was composed of 7 women and 1 man, all of them opinionated, all of them well-read, most of them funnier than I expected. I began walking in the mornings, a path around the perimeter of the grounds that took about 35 minutes at a comfortable pace. I met a woman named Ruth, who had been a high school principal for 22 years, who walked at the same time and at the same pace, and who had opinions about everything and the confidence to express them, and who became, fairly quickly, someone I looked forward to seeing. I called my granddaughter separately from my calls to my daughter. That had been important to me. Whatever had happened between me and her parents had nothing to do with a 13-year-old girl who had sat beside me on the couch and patiently explained a streaming application, who had laughed at the old movie and asked me questions about the actors with genuine curiosity. I told her I missed her. She said she missed me. She said she was confused about what had happened. I told her that grown-up situations were often complicated and that my love for her was not complicated at all, and I would like to come see her in the spring if that was all right with her. She said yes. She said definitely yes. My son flew in from Portland for a long weekend in January. We had not spent more than a few hours together in 2 years. Not since before my husband died. Not since before the sale of the house. Not since before any of this. He slept on my couch and we had breakfast at the small table in my kitchen each morning and walked the grounds in the afternoon and talked, really talked, about things we had not discussed in years. About his father, about what those last months had been like, about the house on Clover Hill Road and what it had meant and what letting it go had cost me. He cried once, briefly, talking about his father, and I held his hand across the table and did not say anything because there was nothing to say, and sometimes that is the right answer. The roses came back in May, exactly as promised, pale pink, climbing the stone wall of the courtyard, filling the air on warm afternoons with something I could only describe as memory made physical. I sat in the courtyard with Ruth one afternoon in late May, a cup of tea growing cold between my hands, watching the light shift across the rose canes. And I thought about everything that had led me here. The phone call in the hallway, the 11 careful days, the drive on the interstate, with my hands tight on the wheel, the terrible vending machine coffee at the rest stop, which I had somehow known, even then, was a kind of gift. I thought about my daughter and what we were slowly, carefully building back between us, which was not what we had before, but might become something more honest than what we had before. I thought about my son-in-law, who had learned that certain things cannot be maneuvered, that certain people cannot be managed, and who I expected would recalibrate accordingly, as people like him always do. I thought about my granddaughter, who was coming to visit in 2 weeks and had asked if we could make the chicken soup I had mentioned on the phone. I thought about my husband, because I always think about my husband, about the back porch and the cold coffee and the evening light, about the fact that I had learned from him, really from the whole long arc of our life together, that the people who love you do not try to arrange you. They do not slide papers across tables. They do not discuss the cleanest way. They just show up. They carry the boxes. They sit beside you and let the silence be what it is. I put my tea down on the armrest of the bench and looked at the roses. Ruth was reading something on her tablet, slightly ahead of me on the path, not paying attention to the roses because she had seen them before, but I was still new enough to this place that I had not yet gotten past them. I hoped I never would. There is something people say sometimes about aging, about the years after a certain point, as though those years are smaller somehow, diminished, a gradual lessening of things. I had half believed that myself, somewhere in the back of my mind, during the long winter of my husband's illness and the longer winter of his absence, as though I were already counting down rather than forward. I did not believe that anymore. I was 68 years old. I had a one-bedroom apartment with a window above the sink and a rose garden I was learning the names of, and a book club where someone had used the word insufferable to describe a fictional character, and everyone had laughed for too long because they all knew exactly what she meant. I had a son who had sat at my kitchen table and told me things he had never told me. I had a granddaughter who was coming in 2 weeks who wanted to make soup. I had a life that was mine, not my daughter's version of it, not my son-in-law's management of it, not anyone's arrangement or plan or cleanest way. Mine. And when Ruth looked up from her tablet and said, "Are you ready?" Because we usually walked another lap at this point in the morning. I said, yes, I was. And I meant it the way I had not meant anything in quite some time. I stood up from the bench. The roses moved slightly in the warm May air. I left my cold tea and followed my friend around the stone path, past the fountain, past the wooden bench, where the man from book club sometimes sat in the afternoons reading mystery novels and looking, for all the world, like someone who had figured something out. Maybe we all had.